Okay, today's question is, are you hitting your macros? I'm going to ask this question on nearly every check-in call. What do I mean by this? Your macros are your daily total amounts of protein, carbs, and fats. That's what we're talking about there. So let's say you're trying to have 220 grams of protein throughout the day. You want to have 300 grams of carbohydrate, and let's say we're at 65 grams of fat for the day. Those are your macros. So what we want to do is spread these out in a way that makes sense, in a way that our body can absorb it. And I also like to time these macros, especially on workout days, around that workout. Okay, so if our macros are 220 grams of protein, 300 grams of carbohydrates, and 65 grams of fat, and we've been tracking throughout the day, as we get to these later meals, we start to restrict the options of foods that we can have before we're like, oh, I've gone over in fats, I've gone over in carbohydrate. And that's how we know that we're staying within our macros. Now, throughout this diet process, we are trying to raise your metabolism. We're going to be aiming to eat a little bit more food. And as these foods are healthier options, satiety is going to be hit a little bit sooner. In fact, like you might feel a little bit more full early on. And then you're going to recognize that you are a lot more hungry later on throughout the day as your body is now looking for these nutrients and you're becoming a fat burning machine. So if we go a little bit over on some of these, it's not a big deal. But as we are really getting into a purely dieting phase in a caloric deficit, we don't want to go over these. So as we space your macros out throughout the meals during the day, we want to have only so much protein that our body's going to be able to handle at that time. We want to have carbohydrates when our body's ready for carbohydrates. We'll use fats to fill in the gaps. But as this meal plan fills out and we are trying to stay within our macros, then food selection later in the day can get tougher. Now, if you deviate from the plan or have a little bit extra in some meal because you're hungry and you're still trying to stay within your macros, towards the end of the day, we run into some different issues. Filling out a typical day, and I counted up what I got left as I'm approaching meal 6 and I'm hungry. I've had 175 grams of protein, 240 grams of carbohydrate, and 80 grams of fat. Now, my original macros here compared to those, you can see I've actually gone over in fat by 15 grams, okay? 15 grams is 135 calories. So I am at a caloric surplus when it comes to my fats, but I am at a deficit here. 60 grams of carbs, that's actually 240 calories. And then here we have, 45 grams of protein. Okay, so we don't want to sub out protein, like you get your protein in each meal. So we want to figure out what we're going to do for our protein. Turns out we've gone overboard on the fats. And if we do want carbohydrates, we can still have carbohydrates because we have 240 right here from the difference being 60. We take, actually this times 4 is actually another 240. So we got 240 minus 135. We got 115 calories left over. Okay. Now you can take that. You can, if we're trying to have carbs, or we're going to figure out, okay, divide this by 4, we get, close to 30 grams of carbohydrate. So we can do 45 grams of protein, 35 grams of carbohydrate. Or we can get this caloric difference, this 115 calories from fat, and we could just do protein and fat in that meal. Now we would be shy on our carbohydrates. If our goal is to hit carbohydrates and not to go over in total amount of calories, we no longer get the full serving that we might have intended here because we've gone over in fats. Now that can get tricky and complicated. So following the meal plan as closely as possible will eliminate any extra headaches at the end of the day. But as you get more familiar with this diet process, you'll know the different moves we can make. We'll talk about different snack options that you like, and we'll go from there. The most important thing is giving the body the nutrients it needs. I would much rather you have protein at that time than feel bad and then not have any food at all. Now we want to stay within the confines that we set on macros. I don't want you to go over on protein. I don't want you to go over on fat. If we go over on carbohydrate, however, we do have the potential to store carbohydrates in the muscles. Specifically, one of the best times is post-workout. So we have our post-workout shake with ignition, and then we want to have carbs in our next meal right away. That's a time where our body's really ready to absorb those nutrients, and so we want to load up on that glycogen. Protein, however, we can't store. Excess protein will be converted to fat or just simply pass through the system. So when it comes to hitting the macros, going over on protein isn't always okay. In fact, if you're finding that you're snacking on bars too frequently, this might be a time to cut those bars out. But if the main issue is that your portion size of your meat is too large at the main meals, like let's say I have you eat 6 ounces of a steak and you want to get the 12 ounce, 16 ounce every time. The truth is, since we can't do anything with that extra protein, it is only serving to store more body fat. Now, we're trying to burn fat and we're trying to build muscle. But if more steak, more protein isn't going to help me build muscle, but I'm hungry, what's the other thing I could throw in to kind of compensate for that? Okay, so what do we do in those meals where we couldn't opt to have the bigger cut of meat? Sometimes because of the protein content, sometimes because of the fat content. But we couldn't opt for the bigger cut of meat. So what else do we do if we're still hungry? Well, the first move is try to have some vegetables. Have a salad if you haven't already. Just be sure we're not adding a super high calorie dressing or sugary sauces to these vegetables that's going to kind of take away from the health benefit. You know, at the end of the day, we still want to keep calories within a safe window. The other thing we could do is add in a starchy carbohydrate, something that's going to be slow releasing, where we're not going to spike insulin so much and we can still have a chance to absorb that into the muscle tissue even if we're far away from our workout time. It is okay to have carbs at night. It is okay to have carbs right before bed. It's not okay to have a bunch of carbs and fats together, which is typically the late night snacking routine. Okay, I hope this video on hitting your macros was helpful. As you can see, these numbers are not just targets that we're trying to hit, but they're also the confines that we have to stay within. And if we go over on one, it can take away from another one. The more closely and more accurately you're able to log your nutrition, the better insight gives me on all of our weekly check-ins. And we can help keep you from plateauing and elevate towards your goals.